It is 2:47 in the morning on March 6, 2026, and I have been sitting at this desk for 4 hours now. My Bible is open to Joel chapter 2. My notebook has 3 pages of cross-references I have been working through since just before midnight, and I want to be honest with you right now before I say anything else. I almost did not make this video, not because I was afraid of what people would think, but because of what I found when I started cross-referencing these dates, because what I found is not just one thing. It is not just a blood moon. It is not just a war. It is the convergence of both of those things on the same calendar day, and what 3 separate prophetic voices across 3 different centuries said would happen when that convergence arrived. So let me tell you exactly what tonight is. Tonight is the night of a blood moon, a total lunar eclipse visible across multiple continents, turning the moon the color of deep red in the sky. And tonight is also a day marked by active military conflict in the Middle East, a region that the prophets of Scripture described with surgical precision thousands of years before any of us were born. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. I am not a prophet. I am not standing here telling you I had a vision and God showed me something that you cannot verify. What I am telling you is that I went into the text. I went into Daniel and Joel and Revelation. I went into the writings of a man named Irenaeus of Lyon, who sat under the teaching of Polycarp, who sat under the teaching of the Apostle John himself. And what I found in those texts, cross-referenced against what is happening in the sky and on the ground tonight, stopped me cold. The blood moon and the war fell on the same day, and 3 prophets agreed on what that means for what comes next. Now I know some of you are watching this and you have seen 100 videos about blood moons. You have heard the warnings, you have watched the countdowns, and maybe you are a little tired of it. I understand that, I really do. But I need you to stay with me tonight, because what I am about to walk you through is not a recycled list of signs. It is a textual investigation. It is a cross-reference study that I am going to walk you through line by line, word by word, in some cases letter by letter, in the original Hebrew and Greek. And by the time we reach the end of this, you are going to see something in these passages that you cannot unsee. Here is what I want you to do right now. Before we go any further, I want you to tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone sit down with you and walk you through what the original Hebrew word for blood moon actually means? Because most people have never heard it. Most people have seen the phrase and moved on. But the word underneath the English translation is something that changes the entire weight of what Joel was saying. And I need to know who is hearing this for the first time tonight. Drop a comment right now and tell me. Because what I am about to show you builds on that word, and I want to know who is in the room with me. Now let me set the stage for what we are dealing with tonight. The blood moon, the total lunar eclipse of March 6th, 2026. This is not a minor astronomical event. This is a total lunar eclipse, meaning the Earth passes directly between the sun and the moon enters the full shadow of the Earth. And when that happens, the moon does not go dark. It turns red. It turns the color of blood. And that color, that deep crimson red hanging in the sky, is not a coincidence of physics. It is the result of every sunrise and every sunset on Earth being projected simultaneously onto the surface of the moon, every dawn and every dusk on the planet all at once, painting the moon red. And the prophets saw it, they described it, and they told us what it means. Joel chapter 2 verse 31, I want you to hear this. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. That is the English translation. But the Hebrew word underneath the word blood is the word dam. And dam does not just mean blood in the clinical sense. In Hebrew, dam carries the weight of life poured out. It is the same word used in Genesis chapter 4 when God says to Cain, "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." It is the word used in Exodus when the Nile turns to blood as a sign of judgment. Dam is not just a color. Dam is a declaration. It is the sky declaring that something has been poured out, something has been given, something is coming. And tonight, on the same night that the moon turns dam in the sky, there is active military conflict in the land that Joel was writing about, the land that Ezekiel described, the land that Daniel pointed to when he wrote about the time of the end. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, not as a coincidence, as a convergence. Now here is the open loop I need to plant right now, because I am going to come back to this at the end of this video, and it is going to change everything you think you understand about the timeline we are in. There is a third element to tonight's convergence. It is not the blood moon. It is not the war. It is a specific alignment of this date with a pattern that has appeared 3 times in recorded history, and each time it appeared, something irreversible happened to the people of God within 12 months. I am not going to tell you what that pattern is yet. I am going to build toward it, because you need to understand the first 2 layers before the third one lands with the weight it deserves. So let me tell you who the three prophets are that I am talking about in the title of this video, because I want to be clear about what I mean by prophets. I am not talking about 3 YouTube channels. I am not talking about 3 modern voices who had dreams last week. I am talking about Joel, the prophet of Israel who wrote approximately 800 years before the birth of Christ. I am talking about John the Apostle, who received the revelation on the island of Patmos and described what he saw with a precision that has confounded scholars for 2,000 years. And I am talking about Irenaeus of Lyon, a man who was born around 130 years after the resurrection, who studied under Polycarp of Smyrna, who was personally discipled by the Apostle John. Irenaeus wrote a work called Against Heresies, and buried inside that work is a passage about the convergence of signs in the sky and signs on the earth that most modern Christians have never read. And what he wrote, cross-referenced against Joel and Revelation, is what I have been sitting with for the last 4 hours. These are the 3 prophets, and they agreed, not because they were in the same room, not because they read each other's work, but because they were all reading the same Spirit, and the same Spirit told all 3 of them the same thing about what this convergence means. Now, I want to be honest about something before we go into the numbered sequence I have laid out for tonight. I am not a seminary graduate. I am not a theologian with letters after my name. I am someone who has been in the text for a long time, who takes the original languages seriously, who reads the church fathers because I believe they are voices the modern church has buried and needs to recover, and I am someone who, tonight, at 2:47 in the morning, looked up from my notebook and realized that what I was looking at was not something I could keep to myself until morning. So here we are. What I have found tonight falls into 7 connections, 7 places where the text, the history, and the present moment converge in a way that I believe is not accidental. I am going to walk you through all 7, and the 7th one, the final connection, is the one I have been building towards since I opened my Bible tonight. It is the one that made me stop writing and just sit in silence for a few minutes, and it is the one I am going to hold until the end, because you need the first 6 to understand why the 7th one matters as much as it does. Stay with me. We are just getting started. Let me take you back to the beginning of what I found tonight, because the context matters. It matters enormously, and I think a lot of people who talk about blood moons skip the context entirely and jump straight to the dramatic imagery. But if you skip the context, you miss the weight. You miss the reason Joel wrote what he wrote, and you miss the reason John echoed it centuries later, and you miss the reason Irenaeus felt compelled to write about it in the 2nd century when the church was still young enough to remember the apostles by name. So let me give you the context. Joel was writing to a people who had just experienced devastation. A locust plague had swept through the land of Israel and stripped it bare, and Joel used that natural disaster as a lens, as a prophetic lens, through which to show the people something much larger that was coming. He was saying, look at what just happened to your fields. Look at what just happened to your vineyards. Now multiply that. Now imagine that on a cosmic scale. Now imagine the day when the sun and the moon themselves become signs of what is approaching. That is the framework Joel was operating in, not abstract theology, not distant future speculation. He was pointing to a pattern where the natural world becomes a billboard for the supernatural. And that framework, that idea of the created order becoming a sign system, runs all the way through Scripture. It runs through Exodus, where the plagues were signs. It runs through Joshua, where the sun stood still as a sign. It runs through Isaiah chapter 13, where the prophet writes, "The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light." It runs through Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus himself says there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And it runs all the way into Revelation chapter 6, where John describes the 6th seal being opened and writes, "The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair, the whole moon turned blood red." So we are not dealing with an isolated verse. We are dealing with a thread that runs from Joel through Isaiah, through Jesus, through John. And that thread is saying the same thing in every generation. The sky will speak, and when it speaks, you need to be listening. Now here is where tonight becomes specific, because not every blood moon carries the same weight in the prophetic framework. The question is not just whether a blood moon is happening. The question is what is happening on the ground at the same time. And this is where the convergence of tonight becomes something I cannot explain away. Let me walk you through the first connection, the first of the 7 things I found tonight. And this one starts in Joel chapter 2, but it does not end there. It ends in a place that surprised me when I traced the thread all the way through. Joel chapter 2, verses 30 and 31. Let me read this slowly. "I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Now I want you to notice something that most people miss when they read this passage. Joel does not say the moon turns to blood and then the day of the Lord arrives. He says the moon turns to blood before the coming of that day. The word before in Hebrew is the word lifnei, and lifnei means in the face of, it means in the presence of, it means immediately preceding, as in the thing that announces the arrival of something else. So the blood moon in Joel's framework is not the event, it is the announcement of the event. It is the herald, it is the trumpet blast before the king enters the room. And that distinction matters enormously because it means we are not watching the end. We are watching the announcement of what is coming. And that announcement is designed to give people time to respond. That is the mercy inside the warning. The sign is given before the thing it signifies, so that those who are watching have a window to prepare, a window to turn, a window to get ready. Now trace that same idea into the New Testament. Go to Acts chapter 2, where Peter stands up on the day of Pentecost and quotes this exact passage from Joel. He says, "This is what was spoken by the prophet Joel." And then he quotes the blood moon passage. And here is what is fascinating about that moment. Peter is not saying the blood moon happened that day. He is saying the pattern Joel described, the pattern of signs preceding the great day, has been inaugurated. The age of signs has begun. The age in which the sky speaks, and the earth groans, and the Spirit moves, and the people of God are called to watch and respond. That age began at Pentecost, and it has not ended. So every blood moon since Pentecost is not a random astronomical event. Every blood moon since Pentecost is a continuation of the sign language that Joel described and Peter confirmed. And tonight's blood moon, falling on the same day as active military conflict in the Middle East, is not the first time this specific combination has appeared. That is what I need to show you next, because here is the historical pattern that most people do not know about, and this is the second connection I found tonight, the second of the 7, and this one required me to go back through the historical record of blood moons that fell during periods of conflict involving the land of Israel. And what I found is a pattern that appears 3 times before tonight, 3 times in recorded history where a blood moon fell on the same calendar period as military conflict in or around the land of Israel, and each time within 12 months of that convergence, something irreversible happened. The first instance is in 1492. Now I know that date is famous for a different reason, Columbus sailing west, but what most people do not know is that 1492 was also the year of the Spanish Inquisition's expulsion of the Jewish people from Spain. And that year fell within a tetrad, a sequence of 4 blood moons that appeared on Jewish feast days. The blood moons of 1493 and 1494 bracketed that expulsion, and the Jewish people who had lived in Spain for over 1,000 years were driven out. Something irreversible happened to the people of God within the window of those signs. The second instance is in 1948, the year Israel became a nation again after nearly 2,000 years of dispersion. And that rebirth happened in the context of a war, the Israeli War of Independence, that began the moment the state was declared, and it was followed by a tetrad of blood moons in 1949 and 1950. The signs came in the wake of the event, confirming what had happened. Something irreversible had occurred. The people of God had returned to the land, and the sky marked it. The third instance is in 1967, the Six-Day War, the recapture of Jerusalem, the reunification of the city that Jesus wept over, the city that Daniel prayed toward, the city that Revelation describes as the stage for the final act of human history. And that war was bracketed by the tetrad of blood moons in 1967 and 1968. Again, the sky and the earth speaking together, the signs and the events converging. Now I want to be careful here. I am not saying that every blood moon predicts a specific event. I am not saying that. What I am saying is that the pattern Joel described, signs in the sky converging with upheaval on the earth, has appeared at 3 of the most significant turning points in the history of the Jewish people and the land of Israel in the last 600 years. And tonight, on March 6th, 2026, we have a blood moon and active military conflict in the Middle East on the same day, and I'm asking you to take that seriously, not because I'm telling you to be afraid, but because Joel told you to watch, and Jesus told you to watch, and the pattern in the historical record says that when the sky and the earth speak together like this, something irreversible tends to follow. Now here is where I need to bring in the first of the 3 prophetic voices I mentioned, because Joel gave us the sign. But I want to show you what John saw when he looked at the same convergence from the other end of the timeline. Go to Revelation chapter 6, the 6th seal. And I want to read this carefully because John is not just describing a blood moon in isolation. He is describing a convergence. He writes, I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Now I want to focus on one phrase in that passage, the phrase the whole moon turned blood red. In the Greek, John uses the word holos, which means entire, complete, the whole thing. He is not describing a partial eclipse. He is not describing a faint reddish tint. He is describing a total lunar eclipse, a blood moon, and he places it in the context of a great earthquake and cosmic upheaval. Signs in the sky and signs on the earth, together, at the same time. The same convergence Joel described, the same pattern that has appeared 3 times in the last 600 years at irreversible turning points in the story of God's people. And I want you to notice something else in that passage. After John describes the signs, he describes the response of the people who witness them. Verse 15 and 16. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it? The great day of their wrath has come. That phrase. In Greek, the word for has come is elthen, which is the aorist tense. It means it arrived, it is here. The people in John's vision are not saying the day is coming eventually, they are saying it has arrived, and they are terrified, not because they did not have signs. They had signs. The blood moon was right there in the sky. The earthquake was right there under their feet. They had every warning Joel promised, and they still were not ready. That is the grief inside this passage, and that is why I am making this video at 2:47 in the morning, because the signs are here, and I do not want you to be among those who saw them and were still not ready. So let me bring in the third prophetic voice now, because Joel gave us the sign language. John gave us the cosmic picture, and Irenaeus of Lyon gives us something that neither of them could give us directly. He gives us the interpretation of a man who stood close enough to the apostles to hear their heartbeat. And what he wrote about the convergence of signs in the sky and upheaval on the earth is something that most modern Christians have never read, not because it was lost, but because it was buried under centuries of theological debate and institutional preference, and I think it is time to dig it back up. Let me tell you who Irenaeus was, because his credentials matter enormously here. Irenaeus of Lyon was born around 130 years after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He grew up in Smyrna in what is now modern Turkey, and as a young man he sat under the direct teaching of Polycarp of Smyrna. Now Polycarp was not just any church leader. Polycarp was personally discipled by the Apostle John, the same John who wrote the Gospel of John, the same John who wrote the letters of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the same John who received the revelation on the island of Patmos. Polycarp knew John personally. He heard John teach. He asked John questions. And Irenaeus sat under Polycarp and absorbed everything that chain of transmission carried. So when Irenaeus writes about prophecy and signs and the end of the age, he is not speculating. He is transmitting. He is passing on what he received from a man who received it from the apostle who wrote the book of Revelation. And that is a chain of custody for prophetic interpretation that no modern commentator can match. Now here is what Irenaeus wrote in Against Heresies, Book 5, Chapter 25. I want to read this carefully, and then I want to show you how it connects to what we are looking at tonight. He writes about the signs that will precede the final days, and he says this, that the signs given in the heavens and the upheavals given on the earth will not appear separately but together, and that when they appear together, the people of God must understand that the time of preparation is not behind them, but immediately before them. He goes on to say that the ancient prophets did not give these signs as curiosities for scholars to debate. They gave them as merciful warnings, as the last call of a loving God to a people who still have time to turn. Now I want you to sit with that phrase, the time of preparation is not behind them, but immediately before them. Irenaeus is saying that when the signs converge, when the sky and the earth speak together, the response is not to panic, and it is not to despair. The response is to prepare, because the sign is given before the thing it announces. The herald comes before the king, and the window between the herald and the king is the window of mercy. It is the window of preparation. And Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century with the living memory of the apostles still in his bones, is telling us that this window is not given to be wasted. This is the first of the 7 connections I want to walk you through tonight, and I want to name it clearly so you can hold on to it as we build toward the others. Connection 1 is this. Joel, John, and Irenaeus all agree that the convergence of signs in the sky with upheaval on the earth is not the end. It is the announcement of what is coming, and the announcement is given in mercy to create a window of preparation for those who are watching. Now let me ask you something before we go to connection 2. I want you to pause right here and tell me in the comments, has anyone in your church, your pastor, your small group leader, anyone ever walked you through what Irenaeus wrote about the signs of the end? Because I have been in a lot of churches, I have sat under a lot of teaching, and I have almost never heard his name mentioned from a pulpit, and yet this man was 2 steps removed from the Apostle John. 2 steps. And what he wrote about this specific convergence is something the modern church desperately needs to hear. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever heard Irenaeus taught? Because if this is new to you, I need to know who is in this room tonight. Now let me move to connection 2. And this one requires us to go deeper into the book of Daniel, because Daniel is the 3rd text in the cross-reference framework I have been building tonight, and it is the one that gives us the most specific language about what happens after the signs appear. Daniel chapter 12. This is one of the most compressed and precise passages in all of prophetic scripture. And I want to walk through it slowly because there are details in the original Aramaic and Hebrew that the English translation softens in ways that change the meaning significantly. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then, but at that time your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Now the phrase I want to focus on is the time of distress. In Hebrew, the word translated as distress is the word zara, and zara is a word with enormous weight in the Hebrew scriptures. It does not just mean difficulty or hardship. Zara means a narrow place. It comes from a root that means to be pressed, to be squeezed, to be confined. It is the same root as the word Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew name for Egypt. Egypt, the place of confinement, the place of slavery, the place from which God delivered his people through signs and wonders and an outstretched arm. So, when Daniel uses the word Zara to describe the time of distress, he is not just saying things will be hard. He is invoking the memory of Egypt. He is saying there is coming a confinement, a pressing, a narrowing, unlike anything the world has seen since the beginning of nations. And out of that confinement, just as out of Egypt, there will be a deliverance. Everyone whose name is found written in the book will be delivered. Now I want you to hold that image, the narrow place, the pressing, the confinement, and I want you to bring it into conversation with what Joel said about the blood moon, because Joel's blood moon is not just a sign of judgment, it is a sign of the narrow place approaching. It is the sky announcing that the Zara is near. And the question Daniel is asking, the question that hangs over chapter 12 like a weight, is whose name is written in the book, because the deliverance is specific. It is not universal in the sense that everyone gets through regardless of their response. The deliverance is for those whose names are written. And the implication is that there is a difference between those whose names are written and those whose names are not. And that distinction, that gap between the written and the unwritten, is what makes the blood moon a mercy and not just a warning, because the blood moon is the announcement that the narrow place is coming, and the announcement is given so that people still have time to make sure their names are written. That is the grace inside the terror. That is the love inside the warning. God does not send the sign after the narrow place arrives. He sends it before, so that you have time. Now let me show you something in Daniel chapter 12 that most people skip right past, verses 3 and 4. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. The phrase many will go here and there to increase knowledge. In Hebrew, the word for go here and there is the word shut, which means to run back and forth, to travel rapidly in multiple directions, and the word for knowledge is the word da'at, which in Hebrew carries the meaning of intimate, experiential knowledge, not just intellectual information. So Daniel is describing a time when people are running in every direction, consuming information at a rapid pace, but the knowledge they are accumulating is not the deep, intimate knowledge of God. It is surface information. It is data without wisdom. It is the kind of knowing that fills a mind without transforming a heart. And I want you to think about that description in the context of the world we are living in right now. We are living in a moment of unprecedented information velocity, More content is produced every day than any human being could consume in a lifetime. And yet, by almost every measure, the depth of spiritual understanding, the depth of genuine intimacy with God, the depth of biblical literacy in the church is declining. People are running in every direction, and the deep knowing, is being lost in the noise. Daniel saw this, he described it, and he placed it in the context of the time of the end, not as a coincidence, as a sign. The information explosion is not just a technological development. According to Daniel, it is a prophetic marker. It is one of the conditions that characterizes the season when the other signs begin to appear. And tonight, on the night of the blood moon, on the night when the sky is turning dim and the earth is in conflict, we are living inside the information explosion Daniel described. All of it at once, all of it together. That is connection 2. Daniel's description of the time of the end includes not just the blood moon and the conflict, it includes the specific cultural and intellectual conditions we are living in right now. The running in every direction, the accumulation of information without wisdom, the narrow place approaching, and the promise of deliverance for those whose names are written. Now, I want to bring these first two connections together before we move to connection 3, because I think there is something important in the way these three prophetic voices, Joel, John, and Irenaeus, all approach the same convergence from different angles. Joel gives us the sign in the sky. John gives us the cosmic picture of what the sign announces. Daniel gives us the cultural and spiritual conditions that surround the sign. And Irenaeus gives us the pastoral response, the window of preparation, the mercy inside the warning. And when you lay those four perspectives side by side, what you get is not a picture of doom. What you get is a picture of a God who is extraordinarily patient and extraordinarily communicative, a God who sends signs before events, a God who gives windows before closings, a God who announces before he acts because he wants people to respond. He wants names written in the book. He wants the narrow place to find people who are ready, not people who were caught off guard because nobody told them. And that is why I am here at 2:47 in the morning. Not to frighten you, to tell you that the window is open, the sign is in the sky, the announcement has been made, and the question is what you are going to do with the time between the herald and the king. So let me move to connection 3, and this one is where the investigation starts to get very specific, because connections 1 and 2 establish the framework. They establish that the blood moon is an announcement, that the convergence of sky signs and earthly upheaval is a prophetic pattern, and that Daniel's description of the time of the end includes the cultural conditions we are living in right now. But connection 3 is where I want to show you something in the text that I have never heard anyone teach, something that requires us to go back to the original Hebrew and look at a word that the English translation renders in a way that strips out almost all of its meaning. Go to Joel chapter 2, verse 31 again. We have already looked at the word dam, the word for blood, but I want to look at a different word in that same verse, the word translated as great in the phrase, the great and dreadful day of the Lord. In Hebrew, that word is gadol, and gadol does mean great in the sense of large or significant, but gadol carries a secondary meaning that almost never gets mentioned in English translations or in modern preaching. Gadol also means to twist, to grow by twisting, like a vine that grows by winding around something, like a rope that gains strength by the twisting of its fibers together. So the great and dreadful day of the Lord in the Hebrew is not just a large day or an important day. It is a day that has been growing by twisting, a day that has been winding itself together from multiple threads over a long period of time, a day that arrives not as a single sudden event, but as the culmination of many threads that have been twisting together across history, across generations, across centuries of signs and warnings and patterns. The Gadol day, the day that grew by twisting. And when I found that secondary meaning of Gadol, I sat back from my desk and I just stared at the ceiling for a minute, because that is exactly what we are looking at tonight. We are not looking at one thing. We are looking at multiple threads that have been twisting together. The blood moon thread, the conflict thread, the historical pattern thread, the Daniel conditions thread, the Irenaeus interpretation thread, all of them twisting together, winding around each other, growing stronger as they converge. The Gadol day, the day that grew by twisting. And tonight, on March 6th, 2026, those threads are visibly tighter than they have ever been. Now let me show you connection 4, and this one requires us to go to a passage that most people associate with comfort rather than warning, because I think one of the ways the modern church has lost its prophetic edge is by separating the comfort passages from the warning passages and treating them as if they belong to different categories. But in the original context, they are inseparable. The comfort and the warning come from the same source, and they are addressed to the same people. Go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Most people know chapter 4, the rapture passage, the catching away. Paul, writing that the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. That is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, and that passage is real. It is anchored in Scripture. It is not a theological invention. It is what Paul wrote, and it is what is coming. But most people stop there. They read the catching away passage and they feel comforted and they move on, and they miss what Paul writes immediately after, chapter 5, verse 1. Now, brothers and sisters, about times and dates we do not need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. And then verse 2, while people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly, as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. Now I want to focus on that phrase, peace and safety. In Greek, the word for peace here is eirene, which means a settled, undisturbed condition, and the word for safety is asphalia, which means security, stability, the absence of threat. And Paul is describing a specific cultural moment, a moment when the dominant narrative is that things are stable, things are secure, the threats have been managed, the conflicts have been contained, peace and safety, and he is saying that it is precisely in that moment of declared stability that the sudden destruction arrives. And I want you to think about that in the context of what we are watching in the world right now, because we are living in a moment of extraordinary tension between two competing narratives. On one side, there are voices saying that the conflicts are being managed, that diplomacy is working, that the situation is under control, peace and safety. And on the other side, there is a blood moon in the sky, an active military conflict in the Middle East, and a prophetic pattern that has appeared 3 times before at irreversible turning points in history. And Paul is saying, watch the moment when the peace and safety narrative is loudest, because that is the moment of greatest vulnerability. But then look at what Paul writes next, verse 4. But you, brothers and sisters, are not in darkness so that this day should surprise you like a thief. You are all children of the light and children of the day. We do not belong to the night or to the darkness. And verse 6. So then, let us not be like others who are asleep, but let us be awake and sober, children of the light. That phrase. In Greek, the word for children here is huioi, which means sons, heirs, those who carry the nature and identity of their father. So Paul is not just saying that believers have information that unbelievers lack. He is saying that believers carry a nature, a spiritual DNA, that makes them constitutionally oriented toward the light, toward wakefulness, toward seeing what is happening. And that nature, that huioi identity, is what makes the difference between being surprised by the day of the Lord and being ready for it. So connection 4 is this. Paul's description of the day of the Lord in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 is not separate from the catching away passage in chapter 4. They are one continuous argument. The catching away is the hope. The day of the Lord coming like a thief is the warning. And the bridge between them is the identity of the children of light, those who are awake, those who are watching, those who are not lulled by the peace and safety narrative, those who see the blood moon and the conflict and the converging threads and understand what they mean. And I need to ask you something right now. I need you to be honest with yourself as you hear this. Are you living as a child of the light? Are you awake? Are you watching? Or have you been lulled? Not by wickedness necessarily, not by obvious sin, but by comfort, by routine, by the quiet assumption that things will continue as they have been. Because Paul's warning is not primarily directed at people who are living in obvious rebellion. It is directed at people who are asleep, and you can be asleep in a church pew just as easily as you can be asleep anywhere else. If that question just landed on you in a way that feels uncomfortable, I want you to drop a comment right now. Tell me where you are. Tell me honestly. Are you watching? Are you awake? Or has the noise of the world and the comfort of routine made it hard to stay alert? Because what I am about to show you in Connection 5 is going to require you to be fully awake. And I want to know who is in this room with me tonight. Now let me move to Connection 5. And this one brings us back to Irenaeus, because I introduced him earlier and I gave you his credentials and I gave you a summary of what he wrote. But I want to go deeper into his actual words now. because there is a specific passage in Against Heresies that connects directly to what we are looking at tonight. And it is a passage that I think the modern church has lost almost entirely. In Book 5 of Against Heresies, Irenaeus is working through the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation simultaneously. He is doing what we would call today a cross-reference study, and he arrives at a conclusion about the relationship between the signs in the sky and the condition of the church that is both sobering and clarifying. He writes that the signs given in the heavens are not given primarily for the world, they are given primarily for the church, because the world, he says, does not have eyes to see them for what they are. The world looks at a blood moon and sees an astronomical event. The world looks at conflict in the Middle East and sees a geopolitical problem. But the church, the true church, the church that is awake and watching and rooted in the prophetic word, looks at the same events and sees the Gadol day twisting itself together, sees the herald before the king, sees the window of mercy that is still open. And then Irenaeus writes something that stopped me cold when I read it tonight. He says that the greatest danger in the time of signs is not that the church will be deceived by false prophets. The greatest danger is that the church will be so comfortable, so settled, so domesticated by its accommodation to the surrounding culture that it will look at the signs and feel nothing, that it will see the blood moon and go back to sleep, that it will hear the warnings of the prophets and file them away as interesting theological information without allowing them to produce the one thing they were designed to produce: repentance, preparation, wakefulness. And I want you to hear that from a man who was 2 steps from the Apostle John. This is not a modern critique of the modern church. This is a 2nd century warning about a tendency that was already visible in the 2nd century church, the tendency toward comfortable accommodation, the tendency to receive prophetic warning as information rather than as invitation, the tendency to know the signs without being changed by them. And Irenaeus connects this directly to what Joel said. He says that Joel's call in chapter 2, verse 12, "Even now return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning," is not a call that was issued once and then expired. It is a standing call. It is the call that the signs in the sky are designed to amplify. Every blood moon is Joel chapter 2, verse 12, written across the sky in the language of damn. Return, even now, with all your heart. That is connection 5. Irenaeus, drawing on Joel and Daniel and Revelation, tells us that the signs are given primarily for the church, and the response the signs are designed to produce is not theological analysis. It is return, deep, wholehearted, costly return, the kind of return that involves fasting and weeping and mourning, the kind of return that costs something, the kind of return that looks like the prodigal son getting up from the pig pen and walking home, not knowing what kind of reception he will receive, but going anyway because staying is no longer an option. Now here's where I want to bring in the historical pattern one more time, because I mentioned earlier that the blood moon and conflict convergence has appeared 3 times before tonight, and I told you that each time it appeared, something irreversible happened within 12 months. But I want to be more specific about what irreversible means in this context, because irreversible does not always mean catastrophic. Sometimes irreversible means transformative. Sometimes the irreversible thing that happens is a deliverance, a rebirth, a restoration. In 1492, the irreversible thing was the expulsion of the Jewish people from Spain. Catastrophic for those who experienced it, but it also accelerated the dispersion of Jewish communities into new regions, including into the Ottoman Empire, where they were welcomed and where Jewish scholarship and culture flourished for centuries. The irreversible thing was painful, but it was not the end of the story. In 1948, the irreversible thing was the rebirth of Israel as a nation. Something that had not existed for nearly 2,000 years suddenly existed again. The prophets had said it would happen. Ezekiel chapter 37, the valley of dry bones, the breath returning, the nation rising. And it happened. Irreversible, transformative, the beginning of a new chapter in the story of God's people. In 1967, the irreversible thing was the return of Jerusalem to Jewish sovereignty. The city that Jesus wept over, the city that Daniel prayed toward 3 times a day, the city that Revelation describes as the stage for the final act, returned, irreversible. So the pattern is not simply a pattern of catastrophe, it is a pattern of irreversible change, of thresholds being crossed, of chapters ending and new chapters beginning. And tonight, on March 6th, 2026, with the blood moon in the sky and conflict on the ground, I am asking you to consider the possibility that we are standing at another threshold, another irreversible moment, another place where a chapter ends and something new begins. And the question is not whether the threshold will be crossed. The question is which side of it you will be on when it happens. So let me move to connection 6. And I want to warn you before I get into this one, because this is the connection that kept me at my desk the longest tonight. This is the one where I kept going back and checking the cross references because I wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly. I wanted to make sure I was not seeing something that was not there. And every time I checked, it was still there. Every time I traced the thread back to its source, it led to the same place. And that place is a passage in Ezekiel that most people have heard of, but very few people have actually sat inside long enough to feel the full weight of what it is saying. Go to Ezekiel chapter 33. And I want to start at verse 1 because the context of this passage is everything. God is speaking to Ezekiel and he says, "Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, when I bring the sword against a land, and the people of the land choose one of their men and make him their watchman, and he sees the sword coming against the land and blows the trumpet to warn the people, then if anyone hears the trumpet but does not heed the warning and the sword comes and takes their life, their blood will be on their own head." Now I want to stop right there because that word sword, in Hebrew, the word is cherub, and cherub does not just mean a military weapon. Cherub in the prophetic literature of the Hebrew Bible is a comprehensive word for judgment. It encompasses military conflict, yes, but it also encompasses the consequences of spiritual negligence, the consequences of a people who had every warning and chose not to respond. The cherub is not just what armies carry. The cherub is what arrives when the window of mercy closes and the time of preparation has passed. And God is telling Ezekiel, you are the watchman, you are the one who sees the cherub coming, and your job is to blow the trumpet. Your job is to make the warning so clear, so loud, so impossible to ignore, that no one who hears it can claim they were not told. And then God says something that I think is one of the most sobering statements in all of Scripture, verse 8. When I say to the wicked, you wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not speak out to dissuade them from their ways, that wicked person will die for their sin, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. I will hold you accountable for their blood. The watchman who sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet is held responsible for the deaths of those who were not warned. And I want you to understand why I am making this video at 2:47 in the morning. Because I saw the convergence. I saw the blood moon and the conflict and the historical pattern and the textual threads twisting together. And I heard the question underneath all of it, are you going to blow the trumpet? Are you going to be the watchman who speaks? Or are you going to close your notebook and go to sleep and let the people around you walk into the narrow place without a warning? I cannot do that. I will not do that. And that is why you are watching this right now. But here is the part of Ezekiel 33 that most people miss, because most people read the watchman passage and they think it is only about warning the wicked. But look at what God says in verse 10 and 11. Son of man, say to the Israelites, this is what you are saying. Our offenses and sins weigh us down, and we are wasting away because of them. How then can we live? Say to them, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live. Turn from your evil ways. Why will you die, people of Israel? Turn from your evil ways. Why will you die? That is God speaking, not with anger, with grief. With the grief of someone who has done everything possible to create a path of return and is watching people choose not to take it. And the word turn in Hebrew is the word shuv. And shuv is one of the most important words in the entire Hebrew Bible. It means to turn around, to reverse direction, to go back. It is the word used throughout the prophets for repentance, not just feeling sorry, not just acknowledging wrongdoing, but physically, directionally, turning around and going the other way. And God says it twice in that verse, turn. The repetition in Hebrew is not accidental. When a Hebrew writer repeats a word, they are doing what we would do with bold text or capital letters. They are saying, this is the most important thing in this sentence. This is what I need you to hear above everything else. Turn, not eventually, not when things get worse. Now, while the window is open, while the trumpet is still sounding, while the blood moon is still in the sky, and the watchman is still speaking. That is connection 6. Ezekiel's watchman passage is not just a description of prophetic responsibility. It is a description of the mercy of God expressed through warning. The cherub is coming, the watchman sees it, the trumpet is sounding, and the God who sends the warning is the same God who says, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. He is not sending the signs because he wants destruction. He is sending the signs because he wants return. He wants shuv. He wants people to turn around before the narrow place arrives. Now I want to pause here and do something I have been building toward since the beginning of this video, because I have given you 5 connections so far, and I have one more before I get to the 7th and final connection, the one I have been holding back since the opening, and I want to make sure you are still with me. I want to make sure this is landing and not just washing over you as information. So let me ask you something directly. Of the 6 connections we have covered so far, which one hit you the hardest? Was it the Hebrew word dam and the weight of what it means for the sky to declare that something has been poured out? Was it Daniel's description of the narrow place, the Zara, and the promise of deliverance for those whose names are written? Was it Paul's warning about the peace and safety narrative and the children of light who are called to be awake? Was it Irenaeus telling us that the greatest danger is not deception but comfort? Was it the historical pattern of irreversible change at the convergence of blood moons and conflict? Or was it Ezekiel's God, grieving, saying, "Turn, turn, why will you die?" Tell me in the comments, tell me which one stopped you, because I genuinely want to know which thread God is using to speak to you tonight, and what you tell me is going to shape what I go deeper into in the next video in this series. So drop a comment right now, tell me which connection landed, and tell me if you have heard any of these passages taught in this way before. Because I have a feeling that for a lot of you, this is the first time someone has sat down and connected these threads in front of you, and I need to know. Now, let me give you connection 6.5. I know I said 7 connections, and I am going to honor that, but there is a bridge passage between connection 6 and connection 7 that I cannot skip, because it is the passage that makes the final connection possible. And it is a passage from the book of Hebrews that I think is one of the most underused texts in the entire prophetic conversation. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 26 through 29. The writer of Hebrews, drawing on the prophet Haggai, writes this: "At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens." The words "once more" indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful, and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Now I want to focus on the phrase, the removing of what can be shaken. In Greek, the word for removing here is metathesis, which means a transposition, a transfer, a fundamental change in the arrangement of things. And the writer of Hebrews is saying that the shaking, the upheaval, the convergence of signs and conflicts and cosmic disturbances is not random destruction. It is a purposeful removing. It is God shaking everything that can be shaken so that what cannot be shaken becomes visible. So that what is eternal, what is unshakable, what is rooted in the kingdom that cannot be moved, stands out against the backdrop of everything that is falling. And I want you to think about that in the context of everything we have been looking at tonight. The blood moon is a shaking, the conflict is a shaking, the historical pattern of irreversible change is a shaking, and the purpose of the shaking is not to destroy. The purpose of the shaking is to reveal, to make visible what is unshakable, to strip away the things that people have been trusting in that cannot hold them in the narrow place, the comfort, the routine, the assumption that things will continue as they have been, all of it shaken, so that what remains, what is truly unshakable, can be seen clearly. And what is unshakable, the writer of Hebrews tells us, the kingdom that cannot be shaken, the kingdom that Jesus announced and inaugurated and is coming to consummate, the kingdom that Daniel saw in his night visions, described in chapter 7 as a kingdom that will never be destroyed, that will crush all other kingdoms and bring them to an end, but will itself endure forever. That kingdom, unshakable, and the shaking of everything else is designed to make it visible, to make it the only thing left standing when the dust settles. So the blood moon tonight is not just a warning, it is an invitation. It is an invitation to let go of everything that can be shaken and hold on to the only thing that cannot be. And that invitation is extended with urgency because the shaking is not theoretical. It is happening. It is visible in the sky tonight. It is visible in the conflict on the ground. And the window between the announcement and the arrival of what is being announced is the window in which the invitation is still open. Now I need to tell you something about the 7th connection, the final one, the one I have been holding back since the opening of this video. I told you at the beginning that there is a third element to tonight's convergence, not the blood moon, not the war, a specific alignment of this date with a pattern that has appeared 3 times in recorded history, and each time it appeared, something irreversible happened to the people of God within 12 months. And I told you I was going to hold that until the end because you needed the first 6 connections to understand why it matters. I am almost ready to show it to you, but I need one more piece in place first. because the seventh connection does not just involve the historical pattern, it involves a specific passage in Revelation that I have not mentioned yet tonight, a passage that most people read as purely future, purely apocalyptic, purely about events that are still far away, and I want to show you why that reading misses something crucial, something that changes the way you understand where we are right now in the timeline. And I want to tell you something else before I get there. I want to tell you that what I am about to show you in the seventh connection is the reason I could not sleep tonight. It is the reason I am still at this desk at what is now approaching 3:30 in the morning. It is the reason I opened my notebook and started writing cross-references instead of going to bed, because when I saw it, when I traced the thread all the way to where it leads, I understood something about the moment we are in that I had not fully understood before, and I am not going to be able to unsee it, and after I show it to you, I do not think you are going to be able to unsee it either. So stay with me, we are almost there. But first I need to show you the passage in Revelation that sets up the final connection, and I need to show you something in the Greek that the English translation has been softening for centuries, something that changes the urgency of the passage entirely, something that Irenaeus understood, and that the modern church has largely forgotten. And when you see it, everything we have been building toward tonight is going to click into place in a way that I believe you will carry with you for a very long time. Go to Revelation chapter 3, and I want to go to the letter to the church at Laodicea, because most people know this passage, most people have heard it preached, the lukewarm church, the church that is neither hot nor cold, the church that Jesus says he will spit out of his mouth. And most people hear that passage and they think of it as a description of a specific ancient church in a specific ancient city that no longer exists, a historical curiosity, a warning to people who lived 2,000 years ago, and they move on. But I want to show you something in the Greek of this passage that changes everything about how you read it, something that makes it not a historical curiosity, but a present tense diagnosis, a description of a condition that is not confined to ancient Laodicea, but is alive and active in the church right now, tonight, on the night of the blood moon. Revelation chapter 3, verse 15. Jesus says, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. And verse 16. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. Now the phrase I am about to spit you out, in Greek, the word translated as about to is the word mello. And mello is one of the most significant words in the entire Greek New Testament for understanding prophetic timing. Mello does not just mean about to, in the casual sense of something that might happen eventually. Mello means on the verge of, imminently, at the point of. It is the word used in Matthew chapter 3, verse 7, when John the Baptist says to the Pharisees, who warned you to flee from the wrath that is mello, that is coming, that is on the verge of arriving. It is the word used in Romans chapter 8, verse 18, when Paul talks about the glory that is mello to be revealed. It carries the weight of something that is not distant, something that is right at the threshold, something that is in the process of arriving right now. So when Jesus says to the Laodicean church, I am mello to spit you out of my mouth, he is not issuing a distant theoretical warning. He is saying, I am at the point of doing this. I am on the verge. The action is already in motion. And the only thing that can change the outcome is what happens in the next moment, the response of the church in the window that is still open. And then look at what Jesus says immediately after. Verse 17. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. And verse 18. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so you can see. Now I want to focus on that phrase. You do not realize. In Greek, the word is auk oidas, which means you do not know, you are unaware, you have no perception of your actual condition. And this is the most devastating part of the Laodicean diagnosis. It is not that the church is openly rebellious. It is not that the church has consciously rejected God. It is that the church genuinely does not know how far it has drifted. It has accumulated comfort and routine and the appearance of spiritual health, and it has mistaken those things for actual spiritual vitality. It is rich in the things that can be shaken, and it does not realize that it is poor in the things that cannot. And I want to bring Irenaeus back in here, because Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, warned about exactly this condition. He said that the most dangerous form of spiritual decline is not the kind that announces itself. It is the kind that feels like health, the kind that looks like church attendance and theological knowledge and religious activity, the kind that fills the calendar with Christian events while the heart grows cold and the eyes grow dim, and the capacity to see the signs in the sky and understand what they mean slowly atrophies from disuse. He called it the sleep of the comfortable, and he said it was the condition that the signs of the end were specifically designed to break, not to condemn the comfortable church, but to wake it up, to shake it out of the auk oidus, the not knowing, the unawareness of its own condition, to make it see itself clearly so that it can respond while the window is still open. And tonight, on the night of the blood moon, on the night when the sky is turning dam and the earth is in conflict and the threads of the Gadol day are visibly twisting together, I want to ask you the question that Jesus asked the Laodicean church, not as a condemnation, as an invitation. Do you know your actual condition? Not your theological position, not your church attendance record, not your Bible knowledge, your actual condition, the temperature of your heart, the clarity of your vision, the depth of your hunger for God. Do you know? Or are you in the eukoidas, the comfortable unawareness that feels like health but is actually the lukewarm that Jesus says he is mellow to address? Because here's the thing about the Laodicean letter that most people miss entirely. After the diagnosis, after the devastating description of the church's condition, after the mellow warning, Jesus says something that is one of the most tender statements in the entire book of Revelation. Verse 20. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with them, and they with me. I stand at the door and knock. The Greek word for stand here is histemi, which means to stand firmly, to take a position, to be established in a place. Jesus is not passing by. He is not glancing at the door and moving on. He is standing, firmly, established, at the door, knocking. And the word for knock is krou, which in Greek carries the connotation of persistent, repeated knocking. Not a single tap, a sustained, patient, persistent knocking. I am here. I am still here. I have not left. I am knocking. And if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. That is the mercy inside the Laodicean letter. That is the grace inside the mellow warning. The church is lukewarm. The church is in the eukoidas. The church is on the verge of being addressed with the full weight of divine response. And Jesus is standing at the door, knocking, still knocking, because the window is still open, because the blood moon is still in the sky and the watchman is still speaking, and the trumpet is still sounding and the invitation is still extended, and that is the bridge to the seventh connection, because the seventh connection is not just about what is coming, it is about what is available right now, in this window, on this night, while the signs are visible and the door is still open, and the God who takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked is standing at the threshold, knocking, waiting, grieving, hoping. Now let me show you the seventh connection, the one I have been building toward all night, and I want to set it up carefully because the setup is as important as the revelation itself. Go back to the historical pattern I described earlier. The three instances where a blood moon fell during a period of conflict involving the land of Israel, and something irreversible happened within 12 months. 1492, 1948, 1967. And I told you that tonight, March 6th, 2026, represents a fourth instance of that convergence. But what I have not told you yet is what makes tonight's convergence different from the previous three. What makes it not just a repetition of the pattern, but a culmination of it. Here is what I found in my research tonight, and this is the thing that made me stop writing and sit in silence. The three previous instances of this convergence, 1492, 1948, and 1967, each marked a specific stage in a sequence that the prophets described. 1492 was about the dispersion of the Jewish people reaching its furthest extent. 1948 was about the return of the Jewish people to the land. 1967 was about the return of the Jewish people to the city, dispersion, return to the land, return to the city, three stages, three convergences, three irreversible thresholds. And when you look at the prophetic sequence that Daniel and Ezekiel and Zechariah describe, there is a fourth stage, a stage that follows the return to the city, and that fourth stage is described in Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. The fourth stage is the turning, the national shove, the return not just to the land and not just to the city, but to the God who called them to the land and the city in the first place, the recognition of the one they pierced, the mourning that precedes the restoration, And Zechariah says it will be preceded by a pouring out of a spirit of grace and supplication, a supernatural enabling of return, a divine initiative that makes the turning possible. And I want you to notice something about the sequence: dispersion, return to land, return to city, return to God, each stage marked by a convergence of signs in the sky and upheaval on the earth, each stage irreversible, each stage building toward the next. And if the pattern holds, if the fourth convergence follows the pattern of the first three, then what is coming within the next 12 months is not just another geopolitical development, it is the beginning of the fourth stage, the stage that Zechariah described, the stage that precedes the consummation of everything the prophets pointed toward. And I want to be careful here. I am not setting a date. I am not telling you that a specific event will happen on a specific day. What I am telling you is that the pattern is real, it is documented, it is verifiable, and it points toward a threshold that the prophets described with remarkable consistency. And the blood moon tonight, falling on the same day as active military conflict in the Middle East, is the fourth convergence in a sequence that has been building for over 500 years. If that just landed on you the way it landed on me when I traced it through the text tonight, I need you to hit the like button right now. Not for me. Because there are people in your life who are asleep right now, who have no idea that this pattern exists, who have never had anyone sit down with them and trace these threads from Joel through Daniel, through Zechariah, through Revelation, through the historical record. And every puts this in front of someone who is searching for exactly this tonight. Someone who felt something when they looked at the blood moon and did not know what to do with what they felt. Someone who needs to hear that what they felt was not imagination, it was the watchman's trumpet. Hit the like button and help this reach them. Now let me show you the full weight of what the seventh connection means, because I have given you the historical pattern, and I have given you the Zechariah passage, and I have given you the sequence of 4 stages, but there is one more thread that needs to be woven in before the picture is complete. And it is a thread from the book of Romans that connects everything we have been looking at tonight to the question of what God is doing in this moment, and why it matters for every person watching this video, regardless of their background, their tradition, or their theological position. Go to Romans chapter 11, and I want to start at verse 25, because this is one of the most compressed and consequential passages in the entire New Testament. Paul writes, "I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part, until the full number of the Gentiles has come in, and in this way all Israel will be saved." Now I want to unpack that passage carefully, because there are 3 phrases in it that are doing enormous theological work, and most people read past them without stopping to feel the weight of what Paul is actually saying. The first phrase is this mystery. In Greek, the word is mysterion, and mysterion in the New Testament does not mean something mysterious in the sense of being confusing or unknowable. It means something that was previously hidden but has now been revealed, a secret that has been disclosed, a plan that was always in motion but has only now been made visible. And Paul is saying that what he is about to describe is a mysterion, a previously hidden plan that has now been disclosed, a plan that involves Israel and the Gentiles in the full sweep of redemptive history. And he is saying, I do not want you to be ignorant of this. I do not want you to miss it. I do not want you to be in the oikoidos about this particular mystery. The second phrase is the full number of the Gentiles. In Greek, the word for full number is pleroma, which means fullness, completeness, the complete measure of something. And Paul is describing a specific moment in redemptive history when the pleroma of the Gentiles, the complete number, the full measure, has come in, has entered, has been gathered. And he is saying that this moment, the moment of the pleroma, is the trigger for the next stage, the stage where all Israel will be saved, the stage that Zechariah described, the national shove, the turning, the mourning for the one they pierced. And the third phrase is in this way, not and then, not after that, in this way. The Greek is kai hotos, which means and in this manner and by this means. Paul is describing a process, not just a sequence. The hardening of Israel and the coming in of the Gentiles are not 2 separate, unrelated events that happen to follow each other. They are 2 movements in a single divine choreography, 2 parts of one plan, and the completion of one movement triggers the beginning of the other. So here's what Paul is saying in Romans 11, verse 25. There is a hidden plan, now disclosed, in which the partial hardening of Israel creates a window for the Gentiles to come in, and when the full number of the Gentiles has come in, the window for Israel's national return opens, and the 2 movements together constitute the completion of the mystery, the full picture of what God has been doing across the entire sweep of human history. And I want you to bring that into conversation with the four-stage sequence I described in Connection 7: dispersion, return to land, return to city, return to God. Because the return to God, the fourth stage, the Zechariah chapter 12 turning, is exactly what Paul is describing in Romans 11. The national shove of Israel, the mourning for the one they pierced, the pouring out of the spirit of grace and supplication. And Paul says it happens when the pleroma of the Gentiles has come in, when the full number is complete. And I want to ask you a question that I think is one of the most important questions you can sit with tonight. What if the blood moon convergences of the last 500 years, the four-stage sequence of dispersion and return and return and return, have been the visible markers of the pleroma coming in? What if each convergence has marked a stage in the gathering of the full number? What if the fourth convergence tonight, March 6th, 2026, is the marker of the pleroma reaching its completion? Not the end of Gentile salvation, but the fullness of it, the complete measure, the moment when the divine choreography shifts from one movement to the next. I am not saying that is definitively what is happening. I am saying that is what the pattern points toward. And I am saying that if that is what is happening, then the implications for every person watching this video are staggering. Because if the pleroma is reaching its fullness, then the window for Gentile inclusion, the window that has been open since Pentecost, is approaching its completion. And the urgency of the watchman's trumpet is not abstract. It is immediate. It is personal. It is directed at you, right now, tonight, while the blood moon is still in the sky and the door is still open, and Jesus is still standing at the threshold, knocking. Now I want to bring in one more voice from the early church here, because I have been leaning heavily on Irenaeus tonight, and rightly so. But there is another early church father who's writing on Romans 11, and the mystery of Israel and the Gentiles is something that I think the modern church desperately needs to recover, and that is John Chrysostom, the golden-mouthed preacher of Antioch and Constantinople, who lived from around 349 to 407 years after Christ, and who wrote a series of homilies on the book of Romans that are among the most penetrating pieces of biblical exposition in the history of the church. Chrysostom, in his homily on Romans 11, writes something that stopped me when I first read it years ago, and that I have been thinking about again tonight. He says that the mystery Paul describes in Romans 11 is not a theological puzzle to be solved. It is a pastoral urgency to be felt. He says that every generation of the church is called to live as if the pleroma is approaching in their lifetime, not because every generation will see it completed, but because the posture of living as if the fullness is near is the posture that produces the kind of urgent, wholehearted, sacrificial witness that actually contributes to the gathering of the full number. In other words, Chrysostom is saying that the way you respond to the mystery of Romans 11 changes the mystery of Romans 11. Your urgency, your wakefulness, your willingness to be a watchman and blow the trumpet is not just a response to the approaching pleroma. It is a participation in it. You are not just a spectator of the divine choreography. You are a dancer in it. And the question is whether you are going to take your place on the floor or whether you are going to sit in the comfortable seats and watch while the music plays. And that brings me to something I need to say directly, because I have been building toward this all night and I do not want to arrive at it and then soften it into something that does not cost anything to hear. There are people watching this video right now who have been in church their whole lives, who know the passages I have been quoting, who have heard the blood moon warnings before, who have nodded along to the prophetic content and felt the urgency in the moment, and then gone back to their lives without anything actually changing. And I'm not saying that to condemn anyone. I'm saying it because I have been that person. I have sat in the urgency and felt the weight and then let the weight dissipate as the days passed and the routine reasserted itself and the comfortable unawareness crept back in. And what I found tonight in the text, the convergence of all 7 connections, the Gadol day twisting itself together, the dam in the sky, the Zara approaching, the mellow warning to the lukewarm church, the pleroma reaching its fullness, the fourth stage of the prophetic sequence beginning, all of it together will not let me be that person tonight, and I do not want you to be that person either. So let me ask you something that I want you to answer honestly, not in the comments, in your own heart, right now. When was the last time you actually fasted, not as a religious exercise, as a response to what you see happening in the world and what you know the text says about this moment? When was the last time you wept over the condition of the church? When was the last time you prayed with the kind of urgency that Joel describes in chapter 2, verse 12, with fasting and weeping and mourning? When was the last time the blood moon, or the conflict, or the signs of the times produced in you not just intellectual engagement, but genuine, costly, directional shove? Because Joel chapter 2 verse 12 is not addressed to the wicked, it is addressed to the people of God. Even now, return to me with all your heart. Even now. The even now implies that there has been a drift, a distance, a departure from wholehearted devotion. And the blood moon is the sky's way of saying even now. Even now while the window is open. Even now while the door is still being knocked on. Even now while the pleroma is still being gathered and the watchman is still speaking and the trumpet is still sounding. Even now. And I want to tell you something about that phrase, even now, that I found in the Hebrew tonight. The phrase is gam ata. Gam means also, even, still. And ata means now, at this moment, in this present instant. So gam ata is not just even now in the sense of despite everything. It is even now in the sense of still in this moment, still at this instant. The possibility of return is real. The door is still open. The invitation is still extended. The God who takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked is still saying gamata, still now, right now, this moment, return. And I want you to hear that not as a theological statement, but as a personal word. Because if you are watching this video tonight, on the night of the blood moon, on the night when the fourth convergence in a 500-year pattern is visible in the sky, I do not think you found this by accident. I think you were led here. I think the same God who is standing at the door and knocking arranged for this video to find you tonight. And I think the question he is asking you through everything we have covered tonight is the same question he asked through Joel and through Ezekiel and through Paul and through Irenaeus and through Chrysostom and through every watchman who has ever blown the trumpet. Gamata, even now, will you return? Now I want to tell you something about what I believe is coming, not as a prophet, as a biblical researcher who has spent the last several hours tracing threads that converge with a precision that I cannot explain away. And I want to be clear that what I am about to say is my reading of the pattern, anchored in the text we have examined tonight, and I hold it with humility, but I hold it with urgency, because the pattern is real, and the convergence is real, and the window is open, and the time for comfortable theological neutrality has passed. I believe we are in the opening of the fourth stage. I believe the convergence of tonight's blood moon with active military conflict in the Middle East, falling within the pattern of the three previous convergences that mark the dispersion and the return to the land and the return to the city, is the marker of the beginning of the stage that Zechariah described and Paul confirmed. The stage of the national shove, the turning, the mourning for the one they pierced, the pouring out of the spirit of grace and supplication. And I believe that what happens in the next 12 months will be irreversible, not necessarily catastrophic, but irreversible. A threshold will be crossed, a chapter will end, and a new chapter will begin. And the question is not whether that will happen. The question is whether you will be ready when it does, whether your name is written in the book that Daniel described, whether you are among the children of light that Paul described, whether you have responded to the gamata, the even now, with the wholehearted shove that Joel called for. You already know who in your life needs to hear what I have been sharing tonight. Their face came into your mind while I was reading those passages. Send this to them, not tomorrow, tonight, while the blood moon is still in the sky and the urgency is still fresh and the window is still open. Be the watchman for them. Blow the trumpet, because the God who held you accountable for your own response also calls you to be responsible for the warning you carry to others. Share this tonight. So let me talk about what preparation actually looks like, because I think one of the failures of prophetic content, and I include myself in this critique, is that it builds urgency without building a pathway. It creates the weight of the moment without giving people anything concrete to do with that weight. And the result is that people feel the urgency, they feel the conviction, they feel the gamata pressing on their chest, and then they do not know what to do next. And so the urgency dissipates, and the comfortable unawareness creeps back in, and the blood moon fades from the sky, and the routine reasserts itself, and nothing actually changes. I do not want that to happen tonight, so I am going to be specific. I am going to give you concrete, actionable, scripturally grounded steps for what preparation looks like in the window between the announcement and the arrival of what is being announced. And I am going to anchor each step to a specific text, because I want you to be able to go back to the Bible and verify everything I am telling you. I want you to be a fellow investigator, not a passive receiver. I want you to open your own Bible and check these references and let the text speak to you directly. The first preparation step is this: establish a daily practice of watching and praying. And I want to be specific about what that means, because watching and praying is not just a vague spiritual posture. It is a specific discipline that Jesus commanded in a specific context. Go to Luke chapter 21, verse 36. Jesus has just finished describing the signs of the end, the signs in the sun and moon and stars, the distress of nations, the roaring of the sea, the powers of the heavens being shaken. And then he says this, "Be always on the watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man." Now, the word translated as watch here is the Greek word agrupnio, and agrupnio does not just mean to be alert in a general sense, it means to be sleepless, to be awake when others are sleeping, to maintain wakefulness through the night. It is the word used for a soldier on night watch, for a shepherd guarding the flock in the dark hours, for a parent sitting up with a sick child. It is active, intentional, costly wakefulness, not the passive awareness of someone who happens to be awake, the deliberate choice to stay awake when everything in you wants to sleep. And Jesus connects this agripneo directly to prayer. Be always agripneo and pray. The watching and the praying are not two separate activities. They are one integrated discipline. The watching without the praying becomes anxiety. The praying without the watching becomes disconnection from the reality of the moment. Together they constitute the posture of a child of light who is living as a participant in the divine choreography rather than a spectator of it. So the first preparation step is to establish a daily practice of a group neo prayer, not a perfunctory morning devotion, not a quick prayer before meals, a deliberate, intentional, sometimes costly practice of staying awake before God, of bringing the signs you are seeing, the blood moon, the conflict, the converging threads, into your prayer, of asking God to show you what He is doing and what your part in it is, of praying with the urgency that the moment deserves. And I want to give you a specific framework for this practice, anchored in what Daniel did, because Daniel is one of the great models of agripneo prayer in the entire biblical record. Daniel chapter 6 verse 10 tells us that Daniel got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before, 3 times a day, morning, midday, and evening. Structured, intentional, non-negotiable, even when a law had been passed making it illegal, even when the consequence was the lion's den, even when the pressure of the surrounding culture was at its most intense. Daniel prayed 3 times a day because he understood that the narrow place, the Zara, is navigated on your knees. So the first preparation step is to establish a Daniel rhythm of prayer, 3 times a day, morning, midday, and evening, even if each session is only 5 minutes, even if the midday prayer happens in a car or a bathroom or a quiet corner of an office, 3 times a day, structured, intentional, non-negotiable, because the agripneo is not a feeling you wait for, it is a discipline you build. The second preparation step is to return to the Word with investigative hunger. And I want to be specific about what I mean by investigative hunger because I think there is a difference between reading the Bible as a devotional comfort and reading the Bible as a prophetic investigator. Both are valid, both are necessary. But in this moment, in this window, I think the church needs more of the second and less of the first. Go to 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. Paul writes to Timothy, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth." The phrase correctly handles in Greek is the word orthotomio, which literally means to cut straight, to make a straight cut. It is the word used for a craftsman who cuts material precisely, without deviation, without waste, without the kind of careless handling that distorts the shape of what is being worked with. And Paul is saying that the word of truth requires this kind of handling, precise, careful, investigative, not the kind of reading that skims the surface looking for comfort, the kind of reading that goes into the text with a question and stays there until the text answers it, the kind of reading that notices the Hebrew word damn and asks what it really means, the kind of reading that finds the Greek word mellow and asks what it really implies about timing, the kind of reading that traces a thread from Joel through Daniel, through Zechariah, through Romans, through Revelation, and does not stop until it sees where the thread leads. So the second preparation step is to establish a daily practice of investigative Bible reading, not just devotional reading, investigative reading. Pick one passage that connects to what is happening in the world right now. Go into it with a question, use a concordance or a Bible study tool to look at the original language. Find one word that the English translation softens and ask what the original word actually means, and let what you find change the way you pray. Let the investigation feed the agripneo. Let the text sharpen the watching. The third preparation step is to practice the shove, the turning, and I want to be honest about what this means because I think the word repentance has been so overused and so underexplained in the modern church that it has lost most of its weight. People hear repentance and they think of an emotional moment at an altar, a prayer they prayed once, a feeling of remorse that came and went. But the Hebrew shuv is not a feeling, it is a direction. It is a choice to turn around and go the other way, and it is a daily practice, not a one-time event. Go to 1 John chapter 1 verse 9. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just, and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. The word confess here is the Greek word homoloheo, which means to say the same thing, to agree with, to align your assessment of something with someone else's assessment of it. So confession is not just admitting wrongdoing, it is agreeing with God about the nature and the weight of what has been done. It is seeing your sin the way God sees it, not minimizing it, not contextualizing it, not explaining it away, seeing it clearly and agreeing with God's assessment of it. And the promise attached to that agreement is staggering. He is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness, not some unrighteousness, all of it. The faithfulness and justice of God are the guarantors of the forgiveness. It is not contingent on the depth of your feeling or the eloquence of your confession. It is contingent on the faithfulness of God, which means the shove is always available, the turning is always possible, the gammata is always true, even now, even for you, even tonight. So the third preparation step is to practice daily homologio, daily agreement with God about the condition of your heart, not a performance of remorse, a genuine, honest, investigative look at your own interior life, and a willingness to agree with God about what you find there, and then to receive the promise, to let the faithfulness and justice of God do what they are designed to do, to let the purification happen, to let the shove be real and directional and costly and transformative. The fourth preparation step is to build or strengthen your community of watchmen, because the agrypneo is not designed to be practiced alone. Go to Hebrews chapter 10 verses 24 and 25. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. All the more as you see the day approaching. The writer of Hebrews is saying that the frequency and the intentionality of gathering together should increase as the signs of the approaching day become more visible, not decrease, not remain constant, increase, all the more. The blood moon in the sky is not a reason to retreat into individual spiritual practice. It is a reason to gather, to spur one another on, to encourage one another, to be the community of watchmen that the moment requires. And I want to be specific about what this looks like practically, because I think a lot of people hear the call to community and they think of Sunday morning church attendance. And Sunday morning church attendance is good and important, and I am not dismissing it. But the Hebrews passage is describing something more intentional than showing up in the same building once a week. It is describing a community that is actively considering how to spur one another on, that is thinking strategically about how to encourage one another toward love and good deeds, that is gathering with increasing frequency and intentionality as the day approaches. So the fourth preparation step is to identify 2 or 3 people in your life who are watching, who are awake, who are taking the signs seriously, and to establish a regular rhythm of gathering with them, not just for fellowship, for mutual agrypneo, for shared investigative Bible study, for the kind of accountability that makes the shove real and sustained rather than momentary and dissipating. Find your watchman community, build it if it does not exist, strengthen it if it does, and gather all the more as you see the day approaching. The fifth preparation step is to position yourself as a conduit of the warning, because the watchman's responsibility does not end with personal preparation. The watchman who sees the sword coming and blows the trumpet for his own household but not for his neighbors has only partially fulfilled his calling. Go back to Ezekiel chapter 33. The watchman is appointed for the land, not just for himself, not just for his family, for the land, for the people around him, for the community he inhabits. And I want to connect this to what Paul says in Romans 10 verse 14. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? The chain of hearing and believing and calling depends on someone speaking, someone carrying the warning, someone being the watchman for the people around them. And in the context of the fourth convergence, in the context of the pleroma approaching its fullness, in the context of the Gadol Day twisting itself together, the urgency of that speaking has never been higher. So the fifth preparation step is to identify the people in your life who need to hear what you have been hearing tonight, not in a way that is aggressive or alienating, but in a way that is honest and urgent and loving, the way a watchman speaks, the way a person speaks who has seen the sword coming and cannot in good conscience stay silent. Find the people whose faces came into your mind while you were watching this video, and find a way to speak to them. Share this video. Have a conversation. Invite them to study the text with you. Be the watchman for them. Now, I want to say something about the subscribe button before I move into the final sections of tonight's investigation, because what I have shared with you tonight is only the first layer of what I am working through. There is a second layer underneath the seventh connection that connects to a passage in Zechariah chapter 14 that I am still cross-referencing, and there is a third layer that involves a manuscript fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls that sheds extraordinary light on what Daniel meant by the time of the end. And when those videos come, you need to be here for them. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what comes next in this sequence builds directly on what you have heard tonight. And if you are not subscribed, the algorithm will bury it and you will miss the next layer of what I believe is one of the most important investigations I have ever undertaken. Subscribe right now so that when I release what comes next, it finds you. So let me bring everything together now, because we have covered a lot of ground tonight: 7 connections, multiple original language word studies, 3 prophetic voices across 3 different centuries, a historical pattern spanning 500 years. And I want to make sure that before we reach the closing of this investigation, you have a clear picture of how all the threads connect, because the convergence is only as powerful as your ability to hold the whole picture in your mind at once. And I want to help you do that. Here's the summary of what we found tonight. Connection 1. Joel, John, and Irenaeus all agree that the convergence of signs in the sky with upheaval on the earth is not the end, but the announcement of what is coming. The blood moon is the herald before the king. The dam in the sky is the declaration that something has been poured out and something is approaching, and the announcement is given in mercy to create a window of preparation for those who are watching. Connection 2. Daniel's description of the time of the end includes not just cosmic signs, but specific cultural and intellectual conditions. The Zara, the narrow place, is approaching. The running in every direction, the accumulation of information without wisdom, the dot being lost in the noise of the information explosion. These are prophetic markers that Daniel placed in the same context as the blood moon and the conflict, and we are living inside all of them simultaneously. Connection 3. The Hebrew word gadol, translated as great in the phrase the great and dreadful day of the Lord, carries a secondary meaning of growing by twisting. The Gadol day is a day that has been winding itself together from multiple threads across centuries, and tonight those threads are visibly tighter than they have ever been. Connection 4. Paul's description of the day of the Lord in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 is inseparable from the catching away passage in chapter 4. The hope and the warning are one continuous argument, and the bridge between them is the identity of the huioi, the children of light, who are called to be awake and sober while the peace and safety narrative lulls the world into comfortable unawareness. Connection 5. Irenaeus, drawing on Joel and Daniel in Revelation, tells us that the signs are given primarily for the church, and the response the signs are designed to produce is not theological analysis, but return, deep, wholehearted, costly shove, the kind of return that Joel described in chapter 2, verse 12, even now. Gam ata, return to me with all your heart. Connection 6. Ezekiel's watchman passage reveals the mercy of God expressed through warning. The cherub is coming, the trumpet is sounding, and the God who sends the warning is the same God who says, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. The warning is not punishment. It is the last expression of a love that refuses to let people walk into the narrow place without being told. Connection 7. The blood moon of March 6, 2026 is the fourth convergence in a 500-year pattern that has marked each stage of a prophetic sequence: dispersion, return to land, return to city, return to God. And the fourth stage, the national shuv described in Zechariah chapter 12 and confirmed in Romans 11, is the stage that precedes the consummation of everything the prophets pointed toward, the pleroma of the Gentiles approaching its fullness, the mysterion of Romans 11 moving toward its completion, the Gadol day reaching the fullness of its twisting, and underneath all 7 connections, running through every thread like a golden cord, is the image of Jesus standing at the door, histemi, firmly established, not passing by, not giving up, knocking, crow, persistently, patiently, urgently, still knocking. Gamata, even now. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. Now I want to speak to some specific groups of people, because I think the implications of what we have covered tonight land differently depending on where you are and what you are carrying. And I want to make sure that nobody watching this feels like the message is for someone else, because it is not. It is for you, specifically, personally, tonight. If you are someone who has been in the church for a long time, who knows the passages, who has heard the warnings before, who has felt the urgency, and then watched it dissipate as the routine reasserted itself, I want to speak to you directly. The ouk oidas that Jesus described in the Laodicean letter is not a condition that belongs only to obviously backslidden people. It is the condition of the comfortable, the condition of the knowledgeable, the condition of the person who has so much theological information that the information itself has become a buffer between them and the raw, transformative weight of what the text is actually saying. And the blood moon tonight is not giving you more information. It is asking you to let the information you already have become something more than information. It is asking you to let it become shuv, real, directional, costly turning, gamata, even now, even you, even tonight. If you are someone who has drifted, who was once on fire and is now somewhere between lukewarm and cold, who remembers what it felt like to be awake and watching and hungry and is not sure how to find that place again, I want to tell you something that I found in the Laodicean letter tonight that I think is specifically for you. After the devastating diagnosis, after the mellow warning, after the description of the wretched and pitiful and poor and blind and naked condition of the church, Jesus says in verse 19, "Those whom I love I rebuke and discipline, so be earnest and repent. Those whom I love, the rebuke is not rejection, the mellow warning is not abandonment, it is the discipline of love. It is the correction of a father who has not given up on his child, and the instruction that follows the rebuke is not complicated. Be earnest and repent, be zealous, be hot. Let the urgency be real, and turn, shuv, come back. The door is still open. He is still knocking, and he is knocking because he loves you. If you are someone who is not yet in a relationship with God, who has been watching this video out of curiosity, or because someone sent it to you, or because something in you responded to the blood moon in the sky tonight and you did not know why, I want to speak to you with the same urgency and the same tenderness that runs through every passage we have looked at tonight. The God who sends the signs is not a God who is looking for reasons to judge you. He is a God who takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. He is a God who says, Gamata, even now, even you, even tonight. He is a God who is standing at the door of your life right now, knocking and saying, if you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in. And the catching away that Paul described in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, the trumpet sounding, the dead in Christ rising, the living being caught up to meet him in the air, that is not a threat, it is a promise. It is the promise of a God who is coming for his people. And the question is whether you will be among them when he comes. And I want to be clear about what it means to open the door. It is not a formula. It is not a prayer you recite. It is the shove. It is the turning. It is the decision to stop running in every direction, accumulating information without wisdom, and to turn toward the one who is knocking. To say, I hear you. I have been hearing you, and I am done pretending I have not. Come in, all of you, into all of me. Hold nothing back, and I will hold nothing back. That is what it means to open the door. And if that is where you are tonight, if that decision is forming in you right now as you hear this, I want to invite you to make it real. Not tomorrow, tonight. While the blood moon is still in the sky and the urgency is still fresh and the gamata is still pressing on your chest. Turn, open the door, let him in. And for those of you who are already in, who are already his, who have opened the door and know the sound of his voice, I want to invite you to do something right now that I think the moment requires. I want to invite you to pray, not a quick prayer, not a perfunctory acknowledgement, a real prayer, the kind of prayer that Joel described, with fasting and weeping and mourning, the kind of prayer that Daniel prayed 3 times a day even when it cost him everything, the kind of prayer that the agrupneo requires, sleepless, intentional, costly. Let me pray with you right now. And I want this to be a prayer that you can make your own, a prayer that is not a performance but a genuine expression of the shove that the moment is calling for. Father, I come to you tonight on the night of the blood moon, on the night when the sky is speaking in the language of damn and the earth is in conflict and the threads of the Gadol day are visibly twisting together, and I want to be honest with you about where I am. I have not always been awake. I have not always been watching. I have let the comfort and the routine and the noise of the world lull me into the oukoidas, the comfortable unawareness that feels like health but is actually the lukewarm that you said you would address. And tonight, Gamata, even now, I am turning. I am choosing the shove. I am agreeing with you about the condition of my heart, and I am receiving the promise of 1 John chapter 1 verse 9, that you are faithful and just to forgive and to purify. I receive that tonight. I receive the purification. I receive the forgiveness, and I open the door wider than I have opened it before. Come in, all of you, into all of me. Make me a child of the light. Make me a grupneo. Make me a watchman who sees the sword coming and blows the trumpet. Give me the courage to speak to the people whose faces came into my mind tonight. Give me the urgency that the moment requires, and the tenderness that love requires, and the wisdom that the text requires. Let the blood moon tonight be the announcement that produces in me the preparation that you designed it to produce. And for those who are watching this, who have not yet opened the door, who are standing on the other side of the threshold, hearing the knocking, feeling the urgency, not sure what to do with what they are feeling, I ask you to reach them tonight. Let this video be the watchman's trumpet for them. Let the dam in the sky and the words of Joel and Daniel and John and Irenaeus and Chrysostom and Paul reach them where they are. And let the Gamata be real for them, even now, even them, even tonight. I ask this in the name of the one who is coming, the one whose return is announced by the blood moon and confirmed by the prophets and promised by the text, the one who is standing at the door, knocking, with tears in his eyes and love in his voice and the fullness of the Gadol day in his hands. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Now I want to say something about the promises, because I have been heavy on the warning tonight, and I want to make sure I do not leave you there, because the warning is not the final word. The warning is the penultimate word. The final word is the promise. And the promises attached to the shove, the promises attached to the turning, the promises attached to the opening of the door are staggering in their scope and their specificity. Go to Joel chapter 2, verse 25, right after the call to return with fasting and weeping and mourning, right after the Gamata, God says this: I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten, the years the locusts have eaten, the years of drift, the years of comfortable unawareness, the years of running in every direction without the da'at, the years of lukewarm. God says, I will repay them, not I will help you recover from them, I will repay them. The Hebrew word is shalom, which means to make whole, to complete, to restore to a condition of fullness and peace, the same root as the word shalom. So the promise attached to the shuv is shalom, wholeness, completeness, the restoration of everything the drift cost you. And that promise is not conditional on the depth of your drift, or the length of your absence, or the weight of what the locusts ate. It is conditional only on the turning, on the shove, on the gamata, even now, return, and I will repay the years. That is the final word, not the blood moon, not the cherub, not the tzara, shalom, the wholeness that comes after the turning, the restoration that follows the return, the repayment of the years. That is what is waiting on the other side of the open door. That is what Jesus is holding when he knocks. Not judgment for those who open. Shalom, wholeness, the fullness of everything the drift cost and more. It is now 3:41 in the morning on March 6, 2026. I have been at this desk for almost 5 hours. My notebook has 12 pages of cross-references, word studies, and historical notes. My Bible is open to 3 different places simultaneously, held by a coffee mug, a pen, and my left hand. And I want to tell you honestly what I am feeling right now, because I think it matters. I am not feeling the dramatic urgency that I felt at 2:47 when I first sat down to record this. That urgency has not gone away, but it has settled into something deeper and quieter, something that feels less like alarm and more like grief. The kind of grief that comes when you have spent hours in the text and the text has shown you something true and beautiful and terrible all at once. The kind of grief that the prophets carried, the kind of grief that made Jeremiah weep over Jerusalem, the kind of grief that made Jesus stand on the Mount of Olives and look out over the city and say, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. That grief, that is what I am carrying right now, not for the world in some abstract sense, for specific people, people I know, people whose faces came into my mind while I was working through these passages tonight. People who are asleep right now, literally and spiritually, who have no idea that the blood moon was in the sky tonight, who have no idea that the fourth convergence in a 500-year pattern is visible in the historical record, who have no idea that the Gadol day is twisting itself together with a precision that the prophets described thousands of years ago, who have no idea that Jesus is standing at the door of their life, knocking with tears in his eyes and shalom in his hands. That grief is the reason I am still here at 3:41 in the morning, and I think it is the right response to everything we have covered tonight. Not panic, not despair, grief that moves, grief that picks up the trumpet and blows it, grief that opens the notebook and traces the threads and makes the video and sends the message and has the conversation and does not let the people it loves walk into the narrow place without a warning. So let me do one final thing before I close tonight's investigation. Let me bring the 7 connections back together one more time, not as a summary, as a declaration, because I think there is a difference between summarizing what you have learned and declaring what you now know. And I want to leave you with a declaration, something you can carry out of this video and into the days ahead, something that will still be true when the blood moon has faded from the sky and the routine is pressing in and the comfortable unawareness is trying to reassert itself. Here is what we know. We know that the blood moon is not a random astronomical event. It is damn. It is the sky declaring that something has been poured out and something is approaching. It is the herald before the king. It is the announcement before the arrival, and it is given in mercy to create a window of preparation for those who are watching. We know that the convergence of tonight's blood moon with active military conflict in the Middle East is not a coincidence. It is the 4th instance of a pattern that has appeared at each of the 3 most significant irreversible turning points in the history of the Jewish people and the land of Israel in the last 500 years, and the 4th stage in the prophetic sequence, the national shove described in Zechariah chapter 12 and confirmed in Romans 11, is the stage that precedes the consummation of everything the prophets pointed toward. We know that Daniel's description of the time of the end includes the cultural and intellectual conditions we are living in right now, the running in every direction, the accumulation of information without wisdom, the dot being lost in the noise, and the tzara, the narrow place, approaching with the precision of a divine appointment. We know that Paul's catching away passage and his day of the Lord warning are one continuous argument. The hope and the warning are inseparable, and the bridge between them is the identity of the huioi, the children of light, who are called to be a groupneo, sleeplessly awake, intentionally watching, constitutionally oriented toward the light. We know that Irenaeus, 2 steps from the Apostle John, told us that the signs are given primarily for the church, and that the greatest danger in the time of signs is not deception but comfort, the sleep of the comfortable, the uk oidas, the lukewarm that does not know it is lukewarm. We know that Ezekiel's God is a God who takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, who sends the watchman before the cherub, who says, "Turn, turn, why will you die?" with the grief of someone who has done everything possible to create a path of return and is watching people choose not to take it. And we know that Jesus is standing at the door, histemi, firmly, crew, persistently, knocking, still knocking, gammata, even now, if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. And the promise on the other side of the open door is not judgment, it is shalom, the repayment of the years the locusts have eaten, the wholeness that follows the turning, the fullness of everything the drift cost, and more. That is what we know. And knowing it changes things. It changes the way you look at the sky. It changes the way you read the news. It changes the way you pray. It changes the way you talk to the people around you. It changes the urgency with which you live, because you are not just a person who has information about blood moons and prophetic patterns. You are a watchman. You have seen the sword coming, and the trumpet is in your hands. Now, I want to ask you one final question, and I want you to answer it in the comments because I genuinely want to know, of everything we covered tonight, of all 7 connections, of all the original language word studies and the historical patterns and the church father testimonies and the scriptural cross-references, which single discovery impacted you the most? Was it the Hebrew word dam and what it means for the sky to declare that something has been poured out? Was it the Gadol day growing by twisting, all the threads winding together across centuries? Was it the Tzara, the narrow place, and the promise of deliverance for those whose names are written? Was it the mellow warning to the lukewarm church and the image of Jesus standing at the door, firmly, persistently, still knocking? Was it the 4-stage prophetic sequence and the possibility that we are standing at the threshold of the 4th stage right now? Was it the gammata, the even now, the standing invitation of a God who refuses to stop calling? Or was it something else entirely, something that landed in a place I did not anticipate? Tell me in the comments, and tell me who you are sending this to tonight. Tell me whose face came into your mind while you were watching, because I believe that the people whose faces came into your mind are not there by accident. I believe the same God who arranged for this video to find you tonight is the one who put those faces in your mind, And I believe he is asking you to be the watchman for them, to blow the trumpet, to send the video, to make the call, to have the conversation, to be the person who wakes them up before the narrow place arrives. Do not wait until morning. Send it tonight, while the urgency is fresh, while the gammata is still pressing on your chest, while the blood moon is still in the recent memory of the sky and the weight of what we found in the text is still real and present and undissipated by the routine. Send it tonight. Now let me tell you what is coming next in this investigation, because tonight was the first layer, and I told you there are more layers underneath it. The second layer involves Zechariah chapter 14, and a passage that most prophecy teachers skip entirely because it is so specific and so demanding that it is easier to treat it as purely future than to sit inside what it is actually saying about the present. And the third layer involves a manuscript fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls, a fragment from the community at Qumran, that sheds extraordinary light on what Daniel meant by the time of the end and what the community of the faithful is called to do in that time. And the fourth layer, the one I am most reluctant to get into because it is the most demanding and the most personal, involves what the early church actually looked like in the years immediately before the destruction of Jerusalem and 70 years after Christ, what they did, how they prepared, what they held on to and what they let go of, and what that looks like for the church in this moment. Those videos are coming, and I need you to be here for them, because each layer builds on the one before it, and if you miss a layer, you miss the architecture of the whole picture. Subscribe right now if you have not already, turn on notifications, and when the next video comes, come back with your Bible open and your notebook ready and your questions prepared, because I am not going to talk at you, I am going to investigate with you. We are going to be fellow researchers together, and what we find together in the text is going to be more than any of us could find alone. I want to close tonight with something that Irenaeus wrote at the end of a long passage about the signs of the end, something that I think is the right note to end on, not with alarm, not with despair, not even with urgency, though the urgency is real and I hope you are carrying it, but with the thing that Irenaeus said the early church held on to when the signs were visible and the narrow place was approaching and the comfortable world was shaking around them. He said they held on to this, that the one who sends the signs is the same one who promises the shalom, that the one who blows the trumpet is the same one who opens the door, that the one who says the Gadol day is coming is the same one who says Gamata, even now return, and I will repay the years, that the God of the blood moon and the God of the open door are not two different gods, they are one God, whose love is so fierce and so patient and so relentless that he will write the warning in the sky and stand at the door and knock and send the watchman and pour out the spirit of grace and supplication and say, turn, turn, why will you die? And mean every word of it with the full weight of a love that has never stopped and will never stop and is still reaching, still knocking, still calling, Gamata, even now, even you, even tonight. That is the God we are dealing with. That is the God whose signs are in the sky tonight. And that is the God I want you to know, not as a theological proposition, not as a doctrinal position, as the one who is standing at the door of your life right now, knocking, with shalom in his hands and tears in his eyes and the fullness of the Gadol day in his heart, saying, if you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in. Open the door, Gamata, even now. I will see you in the next investigation.